But so far, no hackers have been indicted for whoever was behind these shadow brokers' dumps. Was there any travel that you canceled?
Definitely, yeah, no question. They poked back up in July, I think. It was either late June or early July, and I canceled a trip to Singapore. Yeah, you know, one of the issues that came down was, and a lot of people forget about this in the dumps, but you know, in the April dump where they dumped Eternal Blue, they also dumped operational data involving Swift banks and some other stuff. There was our Swift transfers with, you know, some banks, and you know, that said, to me at least, right, you know, without confirming the data is authentic, said to me that it's not just tooling they have operations data.
This means the shadow brokers are claiming to have seen some of the stuff the NSA has actually done.
Right, and at that point, if you are watching the news and you're watching the U.S. Department of Justice indict foreign hackers, you then have to kind of step back and I definitely did this. I did a mental inventory of where did I target, right? And then even then, doing risk modeling of, does it even matter where I targeted, right? Does it really matter where I targeted specifically, or, you know, is it just because I was involved with that group that targeted X country, right? You know, basically, like, could I be, basically, if I touch down here, am I likely to be arrested, right? And it's not just the question of, like, what did they share, right? But, sorry, what did they share publicly? It's also, like, we don't know what they're sharing on the back end, and, you know, if it is Russian intelligence, or, you know, even if it's not, whatever, but what are they, whoever they are, sharing on the backside that we don't know about? So that also was a huge unknown, and that's something I continue to play, you know, mentally today, right? Kind of mentally play through, because it's, you know, we saw Canada arrested the Huawei executive on our behalf, right? You know, an airport, for goodness sakes, right? She never even cleared customs, and that's, you know, every time I travel internationally, I'm playing those, you know, that whole risk modeling, not just of, you know, was I involved with this country, but you know, for the countries that I was involved with targeting, right? Did I basically, I'm on an extradition list someplace, you know, or do they have an extradition policy with that other country, right? So yeah, I canceled travel to Singapore. I've had some other opportunities that I passed on entirely because I just don't feel safe, you know, traveling to a number of countries as a result.
Yeah, it almost feels like you're at their mercy.
Well, there's no question. I mean, I guess if you want to play, I'm going to try not to play the victim here, because, you know, whatever, I made employment decisions that, you know, they were employment decisions. That's why, you know, and those same decisions are why I'm, you know, where I'm at today. But yeah, I mean, they have, there's no question in my mind that they have a lot of operational data about me, and it's stuff that could definitely paint it in the wrong light. And you know, it would paint it in the wrong light would be very bad, and would for me personally. And I am definitely at their mercy for what it is that they choose to release or not release. I've said repeatedly that, and I stand by this. So far, you know, we haven't seen any U.S. hackers indicted, nation-state hackers indicted. But I am not a betting man, but I would not bet against me being the first one or on the first list. I can't fathom that I won't be involved somehow, and I hope I'm not. It's not something I'm wishing for or asking for, but again, just playing the odds, right? When somebody else when another country finally pulls a DOJ, you know, and starts indicting, you know, U.S. nation-state hackers, it will surprise me greatly if I'm not on that list.
Jeez, I don't even know what to say about that. This is life in the shadow of the shadow brokers. It also makes me think about him as a SANS instructor. Like, I've taken a SANS course, and it would just blow my mind if I knew my teacher was wanted in several countries for hacking on behalf of the NSA. Like, is he a criminal or not? Some countries probably think he is, but back home he's just carrying out his orders. And now when I think about it, I think it's actually weird that the FBI indicts the hackers who were working for foreign governments. The hackers were just carrying out their orders. Why not indict the officers or generals or the leader who signed the executive order? And at that point, you might as well treat it like an act of hostility from one nation to another. I don't know, it gets weird and sticky on who to blame for hacking when it comes to nations hacking nations. It's kind of like when Apple is suing Google for 20 things and Google is suing Apple for 20 things. Yeah, sure, Russians hacked the US, but the US has probably hacked Russia too, so now what? Since 2017, we haven't heard anything more from the shadow brokers. Their last tweet mentioned Jake once again, but it wasn't really saying anything new, and since then, it's been quiet. While we normally saw them come back every few months, they've now been quiet for over 2 years. But I don't think that's the end of shadow brokers. I still think there's a huge investigation, a hunt into who's behind it. It quite possibly could have been an insider, a double agent, someone who works in the NSA and had access to this stuff, but was feeding it to another country like Russia. And yeah, at this point, most signs do point to Russia being behind the shadow brokers, but we don't know for certain. But if you think about the intent and capabilities of this group, their intent is to do battle with the most sophisticated hacking group in the world, the NSA, and then burn some of their expensive exploits. And their capabilities are that they can somehow get these exploits out of the NSA, probably one of the most secure places in the world, and then publish them and then get away with it. When you think about all the intelligence capabilities the NSA has, and they don't have anything on this crew, this puts shadow brokers in a top tier category for what their capabilities are. And then you look at how much they say about Trump and the ability to shift the news cycles when it comes to Russia. Yeah, it just looks like it's probably Russia. But like I was saying, there haven't been any FBI indictments about this or public statements from the US government about this either. And especially nothing from the president. He typically doesn't call out Russia for stuff like this. But even if he did blame Russia for this, what would that sound like? I mean, it would admit that the NSA somehow lost control of their secret hacking tools. And that might make the US look bad. So it's a complicated issue. Oh, and I should also mention Harold Martin III somewhere in here too. There's this theory that Harold is somehow behind this. Harold was a government contractor working for Booz Allen Hamilton, and while he was there, he was doing some work for the NSA and got access to some top secret information within the NSA. Harold decided to steal 50 terabytes of information from NSA servers and successfully got it out. We don't know who Harold gave this 50 terabytes to, or if he gave it to anyone. We don't even know what's in the data. But he was caught and is currently serving 9 years in prison for this. The data on the shadow broker dumps could have been something that Harold stole. The timestamps do seem to line up with this, but there's no real good evidence that does connect Harold to this whole thing. Alright, let's take a step back and try to understand what this whole shadow brokers thing means. While the NSA has neither confirmed or denied that they've made these tools, all signs point to these being actual exploits that the NSA has made and kept to themselves, as weapons to attack the enemy with. But let's think about that. This means the NSA has a group of researchers who are actively looking for vulnerabilities in software, like Microsoft Windows. And then when they find these vulnerabilities, they don't tell Microsoft about it. They keep it to themselves. Now, the NSA has publicly said they don't hoard 0 days, or exploits that nobody knows about. But here's evidence that they do. Now, what does that mean? Well, it seems the NSA has decided it's more important to be on the offensive versus being on the defensive. If the NSA was defensive-minded, they would be working with software vendors to find vulnerabilities and get them fixed. But instead, we see this, where they secretly find vulnerabilities and not tell the software vendor about it, so that they can later use it on an attack against someone else. And perhaps this was the message that the shadow brokers was trying to relay, to place the NSA under extra heat for hoarding 0 days like this. And that's certainly what happened. A lot of people use this as evidence that the NSA does not have it in their interest to keep us secure, but instead they want to keep these exploits to themselves so they can be better at doing espionage and surveillance and hacking into other networks, which I suppose could be considered defensive-minded if they're using that to find what an upcoming attack on our country is going to be. But that's just hard to believe when we see nation-states hacking into companies in the US, creating huge problems for those companies. And see, here's the perfect example of when that can backfire, when the exploits the NSA makes gets into the wrong hands, or when someone exposes the capabilities of the NSA. Snowden, the ANT catalog leak, and now the shadow brokers give us a very clear view into what the NSA is doing. And I think it's important that we all take full note of what we see here. Now, as someone who used to defend networks from threats, I want to take a moment and talk about what we as defenders should be doing about the shadow brokers. When the shadow brokers dumped all these NSA-grade hacking tools, we should be analyzing them and trying to understand them as best we can. And here's why. Let's take the Windows event log hack that was dumped as an example. This is a hack that can turn Windows logging off and then back on whenever you want. Or it can delete individual event logs from Windows. And here's the thing, historically, it's been possible as an admin to turn logging off and on. Okay, fine. But when that happens, an event is created that says logging has been turned off. It's also possible to clear all event logs, but again, there's a log created that says that all the logs have been wiped. And that wipes all logs, not just one or two. But with this hack that was dumped, you can disable logging without an event indicating logging has been turned off. So you can turn it off, do your dirty work, then turn it back on, and there's no evidence that the logs have been tampered with, which is really scary, but important to know. There's also a capability of removing individual events. So this is important for us defenders to know because Windows event logs are so important to us. They tell us the truth of what happened. So how do we handle this? Well, now you need to be looking for what's not there. For instance, event logs are numbered. So what if you saw event log 97, 98, no 99, and then 100? Well, what happened to event log 99? Or what happens when you see a logout event but not a login? If you see stuff like this, you can assume you have a hacker who's using these shadow brokers hacks, but also isn't that savvy enough to know how Windows logging works. Because this hacker was smart enough to delete their login event, but not good enough to delete their logout event. And this is the kind of stuff that defenders and incident responders have to learn about from shadow brokers. But not only that, every sophisticated hacking team in the world paid serious attention to these dumps. I just told you about the logging one, but there's like 70 other exploits they dropped. And like government hacking teams have probably done a deep analysis on every single exploit in the dumps to learn everything they could about it, what it does, how to use it most effectively, and then throw it in their bag of tools to use it whenever they want. And this is why it's important for the InfoSec community to know this as well. I mean, if the NSA did create these hacker tools, they probably spent millions of dollars on research and development to make it. And that was paid by my tax dollars. So seeing what their capabilities are and knowing it's in the hands of every hacker in the world, it's an extremely valuable lesson for anyone working in InfoSec. It's simply not every day that we get to look at tools this sophisticated. And now any script kiddie in the world has them and is using them. And ever since these dumps, digital forensics and incident responder teams have been seeing a high amount of attacks that was using stuff from these dumps. And it still continues to this day. So it's very important for us defenders to understand this, especially for the exploit called Eternal Blue. Eternal Blue would go on to be a key component for some of the world's biggest hacks. Hacks that were so big, they practically caused doomsday scenarios for many people. So join me in the next episode as we dig into one of the hacks that used Eternal Blue. A big thank you to our guest, Jake Williams, for taking time to share this incredible story with us. You can follow him on Twitter. His name there is @MalwareJake. Good luck out there, Jake. I also want to give a big thanks to Andy Greenberg from Wired. He just finished writing a new book called Sandworm, which goes into detail about this whole shadow brokers thing, and then goes into detail about what Eternal Blue went on to be used for. And we're going to interview Andy in the next episode, so if you want to check out his book, it's Sandworm. It's really good. Don't forget to help support this show through Patreon, where you can get some bonus episodes, exclusive only to Patreon donators, and you can also get some stickers and an ad-free feed. Patreon supporters really do make a huge impact on keeping this show going, and they're absolutely my favorite listeners. This show is made by me, Grizzly Masquerade, Jack Resider. Sound design this episode is by the headphone-wearing Andrew Merriweather. Editing help this episode by the Cyber Maiden, Damien. And our theme music is by the jingling Breakmaster Cylinder. And even though webmasters around the world add my IP to their blacklist every time I say it, this is Darknet Diaries. Hey, Before we get started, check out the episode right before this one. It's called Shadow Brokers. It kind of sets you up for this one. This is the story of NotPetya, and it took place in the spring of 2017. There was some weird tension between the US and Russia during that time. Donald Trump was president of the US, and it's widely known that the Russians used the internet to meddle with the election. I mean, the FBI has indicted 12 hackers who were working with the Russian government that have allegedly hacked the DNC and Clinton's email servers, which had a critical role in the 2016 election. The relationship between Trump and Putin is weird and mysterious. A ton of allegations are floating around that a lot of back-channel support is given to Trump from Russia. But what is clear is that Russia likes to quarrel with Ukraine. They've been fighting over things for a long time, but in the last 8 years, things have really heated up. Russia decided to take a territory of land from Ukraine called Crimea, and besides that, Russia has been deploying troops into Ukraine, pretty much occupying the area. Like the stuff going on in the Donbass region is just crazy. This made tensions between Russia and Ukraine even more elevated. And now, for like the last 6 years, Russian troops are still occupying places of Ukraine. This was the most blatant land grab in Europe since World War II, and it all happened in the last half-decade. But taking over a large region of Ukraine and occupying them with troops was not the extent of what Russia did to Ukraine. There's so much more terrifying and scary stuff that Russia has done to Ukraine over the internet. In fact, in this rare case, I'll even go so far as to say this is a cyber war. These are true stories from the dark side of the internet. I'm Jack Resider. This is Darknet Diaries. Support for this episode comes from Sentinel-1. It's all too common. A family member or colleague calls, asking for help because some kind of ransomware has infected their computer. Bummer. Now imagine this on the scale of an entire organization. This is exactly what Sentinel-1 was built to prevent and solve. Besides the ability to prevent ransomware and even roll back ransomware if it is encrypted, Sentinel-1 also has a ransomware warranty. Visibility into each of these endpoints is available from an easy-to-use console, allowing security teams to be more efficient without the need to hire more and more people. On top of that, Sentinel-1 offers threat hunting, visibility, and remote administration tools to manage and protect any IoT devices connected to your network. With Sentinel-1, you can replace many products with one. If you're a CISO, a security leader, or IT manager in the enterprise, don't settle to live in the past. Get a personalized demo and a 30-day free trial that allows you to see the benefits up close and personal. Go to sentinel1.com/Darknet Diaries for your free demo. Your cybersecurity future starts today with Sentinel-1. I recently read the book Sandworm. It just came out. It's so good. So good that I wanted to have the author come on the show.
Yeah, I'm Andy Greenberg, and I'm a senior writer for Wired magazine, and I'm the author of this book, Sandworm.
A few years back, Wired asked Andy to investigate whether or not there's been a hack so devastating that it would be considered a cyber war. And Andy found some very interesting stuff going on in Ukraine at that time and decided to look there. He got to work researching this and was finding the story was just getting deeper and bigger than he expected. He found so much stuff that he decided to not just write a magazine article about it, but instead a whole book.
I've been working on this book, Sandworm, since about late 2016, and it tells the kind of unfolding story of this cyber war in Ukraine. And in the midst of that, NotPetya happens, this biggest cyber attack in history. So I was kind of primed to investigate that, and then I spent probably 9 months of the book research time digging into NotPetya specifically, trying to find really everyone who was willing to talk about the experience of witnessing NotPetya unfold, being a victim of this global cyber attack, experts who pulled apart the code, forensic analysts who tied it back to known hacker crews. This is really the story at the heart of the book that I've been working on for about 3 years.
So let's get into what Andy found in his years of research, which led him to NotPetya, the biggest cyber attack in history. Now, I'm pretty sure the goal of this was to create a devastating worm, And a worm is a virus that will self-replicate and spread among many other computers in the network, infecting them too. And then, after it spread, they wanted to take that computer offline permanently, basically destroying it and everything on it. So to accomplish this, they needed a few hacker tools. Now, these hackers had a plan for how to get their worm onto computers initially, and we'll get into that later. But now let's think. Once you get your worm onto just one computer in a network, how can you get it to spread to many others? And whatever method you use, you want it to work very well, meaning you don't want it to be stopped by someone who's just patched their computer or has antivirus on. No, this worm has to cut through all of that. So the hackers used a tool called Mimikatz. Mimikatz is crazy and amazing, and one of the most frustrating things I've ever seen. I could talk about Mimikatz for hours. It's nuts. But the skinny of it is this. On Windows computers is a program called lsas.exe, and this process is the one that's responsible for enforcing security on Windows computers. Yeah, well, get this. When someone logs into a Windows computer, lsas stores your username and password in clear text in the memory. Now, this is so lsas can authenticate that person to other things like shared drives, email, SharePoint, etc., without having to ask the user for their password again and again. This is all fine and good until a French researcher named Benjamin Delpy, or the Gentle Kiwi, took a look in the memory. He used a tool to examine what lsas put into memory and was amazed to see it storing usernames and passwords in clear text, not encrypted at all. So he built a tool to extract this username and password to display it to anyone who wants to see it. And that tool he made is called Mimikatz. And he made it open source for anyone to use it. And he kept building on it, teaching it how to trick Windows into authenticating in so many other ways, like passing hashes and tokens. It's incredibly powerful and insanely successful. Because get this, suppose you break into a computer or sit down at someone else's computer. If you download and run Mimikatz, you can suddenly see every single user who's logged into that computer since it was rebooted. And not just their username, but you can see their full password too. On a shared computer like a central jump server, you can potentially get the passwords to a huge number of employees, and possibly an admin account too. And the thing that frustrates me the most about Mimikatz is that for years, Microsoft refused to fix this problem. They just didn't acknowledge it or understand it. And in recent versions of Windows, they have fixed some of it. But Mimikatz continues to evolve, getting around whatever fix Microsoft comes up with. So even today, on a brand new Windows computer, it's not secure against Mimikatz by default. This is why it's such a powerful exploit. Now, once the worm infects a computer and spreads, the last thing it needs to do is destroy that computer. And the goal of this attack was to permanently destroy as many computers as possible. And the best way to do that remotely is to encrypt everything on it, make it useless unless you have the decryption key. This is typically known as ransomware. But I don't think these hackers had any intention on making money off this. Their goal was to destroy computers, and ransomware was just the perfect tool to do that. The name of the ransomware they decided to use was a modified version of Petya. It'll infect the system at the master boot record, instruct the machine to reboot, and upon rebooting, it'll encrypt that file system, preventing it from working at all anymore. It'll then show this screen saying your files have been encrypted and you need to pay to get it unencrypted. Now you combine these two tools into a worm and instruct it to spread through the network. It's very effective just this by itself. Computers that are fully patched and updated can get their passwords taken from memory and use that to spread to other computers quite easily. And the more systems it gets into, the more usernames and passwords it collects, and it just becomes unstoppable at some point. And it could potentially encrypt all hard drives in a network. But even though that's a powerful 1-2 combo, it might not be a knockout blow. What if those computers it initially infects didn't have any extra passwords to steal or something? So another tool was added to this worm, something called Eternal Blue.
Eternal Blue was probably the most powerful of all of the hacking tools dumped onto the internet by this very mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers. The Shadow Brokers appeared in the summer of 2016 and just started periodically leaking NSA hacking tools onto the internet. These are full working zero-day exploits in some cases.
Yeah, in the previous episode, we heard all about what the Shadow Brokers did, but it was their last dump, where they handed the world a devastating hacker tool.
And it included this hacking tool called Eternal Blue, which exploited a vulnerability in a Windows function called Server Message Block that allows machines to essentially share information between themselves. By exploiting that SMB vulnerability, Eternal Blue could basically run code remotely on any Windows machine that was vulnerable anywhere in the world. It turned out that the NSA had actually worked with Microsoft to try to warn everyone about this zero-day when the shadow brokers first appeared. And there was a patch for this SMB vulnerability. But of course, as with all patches, it was kind of an epidemiological problem trying to get people all around the world to implement this patch. When Eternal Blue went public, there were still countless thousands or hundreds of thousands of machines, really, that were still vulnerable.
With Eternal Blue in the hands of every hacker, the world was about to be sucker punched in ways it never imagined. Eternal Blue is an exploit to get into Windows computers. It just bypasses the username and password altogether and lets the hacker right in. And from there they can look at files, or upload things, issue commands, do whatever they want. And yeah, while Windows had a patch for this, not everyone was applying their patches. So the chances of this working, they're still high, probably 20 to 50%. And that just might be enough to get that worm through some difficult places that Mimikatz couldn't get into. So here's the combo for this hack. First, if the worm could get onto a system somehow and then run Mimikatz to get all the usernames and passwords that have logged into that computer, then it could take those usernames and passwords and try to log into all its neighbors' computers to see if maybe it can get into those too, and collect more usernames and passwords along the way. And by golly, with a list of usernames and passwords to try, it would be able to successfully get into a lot of computers to infect them too. But if it couldn't log in like that, it would then try to use Eternal Blue to see if that system was unpatched and exploit it that way. So the worm would try two very powerful and dangerous ways to get into every computer on the network. And once the virus tried to spread as far as it could, it would then infect it with ransomware, encrypting the whole thing, making it useless, and then rebooting the machine so it's unusable. This would be an extremely powerful combo that certainly could be a knockout blow. Now, the target of this attack was Ukraine, and the goal was to take out as many computers as possible in Ukraine. Businesses, government agencies, doesn't matter, everything. Take down all of Ukraine's network. But how can you target an entire country? This is both a wide-scale attack, but it's also limited in size. They didn't want it to spread through the whole world, just Ukraine. This is a very interesting question, and something I bet the hackers thought a long time about. They ultimately chose to target a small company called Linkos Group.
Linkos Group is a pretty small, family-run software business based in a building in western Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, in this kind of nondescript building in a kind of dingy neighborhood on the edges of Podil, a kind of like hipster neighborhood in Kiev. In the third floor of that building is a server room full of these like pizza box-sized servers stacked up. One of them was responsible for sending updates to Medoc, this accounting software that Linkos Group sold, their kind of flagship product. It's really like the kind of QuickBooks or TurboTax of Ukraine. Anyone who files taxes in Ukraine or really who wants to do business in Ukraine use this software, Medoc.
You see where this is going? Medoc is like TurboTax, but for Ukraine. People who need to file their taxes in Ukraine use this software. So if the hackers could infect Medoc with this worm, a spreading, replicating virus, then the attack would only hit people who have to do taxes in Ukraine.
In June of 2017, a group of hackers took over that update server, and they hijacked Medoc's update mechanism to push out their own malware. So everyone everywhere in the world who had Medoc installed suddenly had NotPetya, this worm, installed as well.
We don't know how, but they got into that Medoc update server, maybe a phishing email or something. But it didn't matter. The stage was set, and the biggest cyber attack in history was about to be launched. On Tuesday, June 27, 2017, the virus was placed on the Medoc update server, and an update was sent to thousands of computers in Ukraine. Each and every one of those computers were infected by this virus. The seed was planted and was instantly spreading. As soon as someone got the update, they were infected, and immediately the worm spread to another machine, and another machine, and another. grabbing usernames and trying to log into its neighbor and then using those passwords it would get along the way to spread to as many computers as it could in the network, as well as using Eternal Blue to get into computers it didn't have the password for. As soon as it was infecting a computer, it was rebooting it and encrypting it, rendering it useless. In a matter of minutes, entire organizations were seeing their networks just go down, like a shadow being cast on all the computers. Now, all this happened on the day before Ukraine's Constitution Day, which is the day Ukraine celebrates their independence from Russia. What was typically supposed to be a slow day leading up to a holiday was a day that some people will never forget.
Alexei Yasinski, this forensic analyst and incident responder for a company in Ukraine called Information Systems Security Partners, described the experience of going to one of their clients early that morning. One of the very first victims of NotPetya, Oshad Bank, this former national bank of Ukraine. And as he went in, he described entering a building where everyone seemed to be in a kind of state of shock because all of their systems had been shut down simultaneously. Around 90% of all of the computers in Oshad Bank had been hit with this mysterious ransomware worm. It looked at first like a normal piece of ransomware which encrypts all of your files. In fact, in this case, it encrypts the entire operating system of the computer. And there was a message on the screens of Oshad Bank's PCs demanding $300 in Bitcoin as a ransom before the attackers would unlock the computers. But Alexei Yasinski says that he pretty quickly, as he was doing incident response for Oshad Bank, could tell that this was something unusual, at least in the sense that it was extremely virulent. The worm had essentially rampaged through Oshad Bank's network until it got access to an administrator's credentials, and then it had used those credentials to jump out to every machine that administrator had access to, kind of very quickly just saturating the entire network and shutting it down.
That day, the bank could not do business. The people came to work, but their terminals were all encrypted and frozen. Customers and employees were both very upset that systems were down.
Every one of these computers that had been hit was completely locked and showing this ransomware screen, demanding $300 in Bitcoin before the hackers would decrypt it and give Oshad Bank's staff back access to that machine. But Alexei Yasinski and ISSP over the next hours would very quickly come to the conclusion that this was not really ransomware. It was a destructive worm posing as ransomware. Even if you paid that $300 in Bitcoin, you were not going to get your files back. That was just a kind of thin ruse hiding an act of cyber war.
As incident responders investigated this, they found that the ransomware was similar to the Petya ransomware. It was originally thought to be Petya, but some additional research went into it and found this is a new strain, and it was not Petya. Since there were so many people saying that it was not Petya, that's the name that stuck for this virus. This would become known as the Not Petya attack on Ukraine. And after the break, we'll hear just how destructive Not Petya became. I want to take a quick break to talk about another podcast I've been going through. It's called The Jordan Harbinger Show, and I'm really digging it. The episode that got me hooked was when he interviewed Richard Clark. He worked for the National Security Council, and they both get into things like nation-state hacking, and it just blew my mind. Jordan always surprises and delights with his high-caliber guests, such as an ex-KGB spy, an art forger, and a scam artist. But what Jordan tries to do every episode is to distill the things from the guests that you can apply to your own life, so you can get ahead, stay sharp, and be ready for new challenges. This is a show truly about leveling up in life, in relationships, in friendships, at work, at home, and everywhere in between. And it's not some pop psychology superficial advice, nor some BS inspirational stuff. This is a show that offers meaningful, fun, life-changing insight with a practical edge, so listeners can apply something right out of the box. Every show, every time. There's even worksheets that go along with each episode to help you apply this stuff. Take my word for it, give the Jordan Harbinger Show a try, and level yourself up. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or just go to jordanharbinger.com/subscribe. NotPetya was not just hitting this one bank. It was initially infecting networks through the MEDOC software update and then spreading into hundreds of networks, hitting thousands of computers through the whole country of Ukraine.
At the same time as Oshad Bank was being taken down by NotPetya, it in fact was spreading across the entire country of Ukraine.
In just a short time, in a matter of hours, a massive amount of networks and computers were permanently down, infected by NotPetya. One researcher claimed that over 300 companies were brought down in Ukraine over this attack. Pretty much the whole country was infected by this in some way. Either you personally were down, or your supplier was down, or your neighbor was down, or your client was down. It was a catastrophe.
But NotPetya didn't stop spreading at the borders of Ukraine. I mean, no cyber attack cares about borders, obviously. And so really any multinational company that had VDoc installed was also instantly infected with NotPetya. And that included FedEx, Maersk, the world's largest shipping firm, Merck, the New Jersey-based pharmaceutical company, Saint-Gobain, the French construction firm, Rankin Benckiser, this UK manufacturing firm, Mondelez, the food company that owns Nabisco and Cadbury, and really countless others. We just know that initial list that I just named because they were the ones who were public companies that had to declare their damages to shareholders, but we may never know the full extent of all of the companies that were hit by NotPetya.
Of course, if these companies either had VDoc or were connected to networks of companies in Ukraine or were sharing computers with infected companies, they were also getting infected with NotPetya too.
Counterintuitively, NotPetya also spread into Russia and did really serious damage there to the state oil company Rosneft, to the steelmaker Evraz, to the medical technology firm In Vitro. Really, everyone who touched Ukraine in any way, which of course includes Russia, suffered damages from this.
Companies all over were scrambling to figure out what happened. How do we fix this? Is there a way to recover or undo this? How do we get stuff working again?
All across Ukraine, essentially, people were figuring out that it was better just to shut down your entire network, turn everything off, than watch it be devoured by NotPetya. So really every government agency, the postal service, all of these companies, they were in many cases shutting down their own networks, but usually it was too late. NotPetya had often infected the majority of their systems before they could even pull the plug.
With so many computers down all over the city and country, the feeling must have been surreal.
The kind of personal experience of being in the middle of this, I heard it best from this guy Pavlo Bondarenko, who was an IT administrator at the Ukrainian Health Ministry. And he had very early in the day figured out that they needed to pull the ministry's network offline. And that probably spared the health ministry from some terrible damage. But nonetheless, he spent the whole day fighting off NotPetya. And then at the end of the day, he left the office to go home. Tried to get on the subway. Found that NotPetya had actually destroyed the contactless payment system that we usually use to swipe in to get onto the Kiev metro. So he had to go out to find an ATM where you could get cash to buy a token. All of the ATMs that he tried were also paralyzed by NotPetya, one after another. Until he found one ATM that was still working but had a very small cash limit and this long line of people trying to get cash. He waited in line, got the cash, bought the token, got on the subway, went to his neighborhood, got out and tried to go grocery shopping. Found that the payment system at the grocery store was down. He had to get more cash because he had run out. So he had to find another ATM among all of the paralyzed ATMs where he could get cash out again. And Pablo described that experience as not just being kind of annoying, but being disorienting. Like he had found himself in a world where everything was suddenly broken. He described it as a kind of like a natural disaster, except that it was entirely man-made, and that things had gone very quickly from just seeing what was new on Facebook to asking questions like, did he have enough money to buy food for the next week? People were asking, did they have the medicine that they needed? Would they be able to get to work and back? It was a kind of fundamental cyber attack against the basic infrastructure of people's lives that we had really never seen before.
This really scares me. This is a major disaster, unlike anything any country has ever seen. For so much of the country's infrastructure to be down like this, it's chaos. I'm not prepared for something like this to happen where I live. To suddenly and without notice to not be able to get gas, food, or money, To have hospitals turning away people because their network is down? In disasters, there isn't enough emergency crews to help everyone. You're on your own, or you're at the whim of someone else willing to help you. And I just think of how connected our whole world is now. And to see it so fragile like this, where one well-crafted, well-timed, well-executed virus can do such an enormous amount of destruction, I'm shaken.
I would say that the cyber war began in Ukraine much earlier. As soon as Ukraine came under repeated, sustained, disruptive cyber attacks, starting in the fall of 2015, culminating in 2 blackouts in late 2015 and then late 2016, that was cyber war. But this was kind of a new stage of the cyber war, a kind of carpet bombing of the whole country's digital systems. In terms of like what is cyber war, I would say that Richard Clarke got it right in his book in 2009, I think it was, the book Cyber War, where he basically defines it as an act by nation-states hackers designed to disrupt an adversary's systems. I think that that's like at least the most basic definition for cyber war. I think other things that make something a cyber war are that it affects critical infrastructure, that it is massive in scale, that it takes place in the midst of a physical war, and all of those things are true of, in fact, the entire campaign of cyber attacks carried out against Ukraine, but especially NotPetya, this kind of climax of that whole series of attacks.
Okay, alright, I'm back now. I had to pause there for a second and go build my 72-hour kit because this is freaking me out. I don't know what to think of this. I guess I'm just lucky this didn't hit the US.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people see what happened to Ukraine and they think like, whew, that could have been us. That's scary. But in fact, what I keep trying to emphasize is that NotPetya did hit us too. It didn't hit us at the same national scale as Ukraine, but it hit American companies, it hit Western companies. You know, FedEx, I'm talking about FedEx and Merck in New Jersey, and Maersk's terminal also in New Jersey. Somehow New Jersey got a lot of damage here. But this was not a Ukrainian attack. This was an attack that spilled out from Ukraine to the entire world and immediately included us too.
Okay, so let's talk about Maersk. Maersk is not a Ukrainian company. It's a Danish company. They've been the largest shipping company in the world for the last 3 decades. Picture those huge container ships at sea carrying tons of those big metal container boxes full of goods. And they're headquartered in Copenhagen in Denmark. But they were impacted by this too.
Maersk had one office in Odessa on the Black Sea coast in the south of Ukraine. And in that office, they had one computer that I know about, at least, that had MEDOC installed. And that was all that it took for Maersk's entire global network to be infected. At Maersk's global headquarters in Copenhagen, this kind of beautiful blue windowed building on the Copenhagen harbor's promenade, staff just noticed all of a sudden on the afternoon of June 27th that screens around the whole building were just turning black. One staffer described seeing a wave of screens turning black all around him, black, 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 black. So some staffers started to crowd around the help desk in the basement of the building, but very soon it was clear that this was much larger than that every computer in the building was being infected, and IT administrators were soon running down hallways, unplugging computers, running into meeting rooms to unplug computers in the middle of meetings, jumping over turnstiles, because even the turnstiles that control the physical security of the building had been paralyzed by this attack. And they were rushing to really turn off all of the systems because they knew that every second meant hundreds or even thousands of more machines that would be compromised. But that was really just the kind of digital part of the attack on Maersk. Maersk runs this massive global shipping machine with these container ships the size of the Empire State Building, with another Empire State Building's worth of cargo on top of them. And all around the world, those ships were starting to arrive at Maersk-owned terminals everywhere in the world, and their systems had been shut down so that nobody even knew what was on these gargantuan ships. They couldn't even figure out how to unload them. And meanwhile, the real choke points at 17 terminals that were shut down by this, 17 ports essentially all around the world, were the gates outside, where the trucks lined up at the Elizabeth, New Jersey APM terminal owned by Maersk. It's a whole square mile size patch of land in the harbor. And these massive ships pull up, but so do thousands of trucks every day. And they come to this checkpoint outside the terminal where they're told over this voice over IP system where to go, kind of what to pick up or drop off. And all of that on June 27th instantly shut down. So trucks were arriving at that gate outside the terminal and nobody was talking to them. They were locked out. They had no idea what was going on. Maersk couldn't even send them an email to explain. The trucking companies were entirely in the dark. People were getting furious. The port police started to tell them, you need to turn your truck around and leave. But they had stuff that they had to ship somehow for just-in-time manufacturing processes of perishable goods that had to be refrigerated. It was just a fiasco, and soon tens of thousands of trucks were lining up at 17 of Maersk's terminals all around the world, from Los Angeles to New Jersey. Tens of thousands of trucks in total. Yes, certainly. Each one of these terminals had lines of trucks that were miles long. From Los Angeles to New Jersey to Algeciras in Spain, to Rotterdam in the Netherlands, to Mumbai in India. This was a significant chunk of the entire physical operation of the world's largest shipping conglomerate just shut down in an instant.
So frightening.
Yeah, it's hard to get your head around the scale of this in physical terms. I mean, it's interesting in part because we've always been scared, or I've always been scared of these attacks that directly interact with physical infrastructure, like Stuxnet. Some of the Ukraine attacks were like that too, the ones that turned off the power in utilities, causing the first ever blackouts caused by hackers. But it turns out that if you just destroy tens and tens of thousands of computers, just the computers around the world, you can maybe do more physical disruption just by taking out all of that digital equipment. With that alone, just paralyzing the brains of a corporation like Maersk can do more physical disruption than directly attacking the physical equipment. I don't know if that's an idea you really care about, but it's like something. Yeah.
It puts me in deep thought, this whole thing. Like, everything is on those shipping things, everywhere from diapers to food to medical supplies.
Yeah. Like, what did their ships contain? It was just absolutely everything that the modern economy runs on, from manufacturing components to food, consumer goods that are part of a just-in-time supply chain. I mean, Maersk is really just at the heart of the global economy, and its operations just kind of instantaneously winked out of existence.
Hearing this just reminds me about where we were in 2008. Certain banks were facing financial crisis in the US, and they were deemed too big to fail because they were so integrated into our lives. So the US government bailed them out, giving them billions of dollars to restabilize the nation. I'm starting to think that Maersk is also so interconnected into the US that they might also be too big to fail. Each ship has 1 million items on it, crucial items that we need in order to live. But as far as I know, the US government, or any government, did not help Maersk. Yeah, the FBI called them to investigate the case, but that's about it. Maersk could not solve this problem by themselves, and the citizens of the US would suffer until Maersk could get back on their feet. Because not just the US, the whole world relies on deliveries from Maersk. They have shipping yards all over the planet. Not Petya had a clear global impact. Maersk absolutely needed help. Something like 49,000 of their computers were down worldwide, which was 100% of the Windows computers they had in their network. 100% of them! The only computers that weren't encrypted were either Linux or Unix systems, or the ones that were down before this attack, or were offline for this attack. And because their network would periodically sync to backups, all their backups and disaster recovery centers were wiped too. Their emails were down, phones were down. You couldn't even see your contact list in your mobile phone because that relied on Exchange being up. Maersk was in trouble. It wasn't clear to them at first who was threatening them, or what, or why. There was so much chaos everywhere, you just didn't know who all the victims were yet. But they called up Microsoft right away and spoke to someone very high up there to discuss options. Microsoft got busy trying to find solutions to this, and they heard lots of complaints from other people too. A few days later, they had some news. Microsoft called back Maersk and told them they cracked a decryption key to decrypt the ransomware. But the bad news was they only cracked the decryption key for one computer. And the other problem is that it took them 22,000 compute hours to crack that single key for one computer. Maersk had 49,000 computers, so this wouldn't work. There was no choice. Maersk had lost everything, with no help in sight. They didn't seem to have any way to recover. Everything was gone, all backups too. Ransomware was holding it all hostage. Now, I heard from a few places that Maersk got in contact with the hackers who made this ransomware, and there was discussion about prices on it and how much it would cost to unlock all of Maersk's computers. And this conversation went back and forth between the hackers and Maersk for a little while. The story goes is that the hackers said themselves that they didn't expect this to spread so far so quickly. So it sounds like even the hacker was impressed by how effective it was. But ultimately, Maersk decided not to pay for a number of reasons. For one, it paints a target on Maersk's back as someone who pays ransoms. But also, security researchers were suggesting that this isn't a ransomware, it's a wiper, and that even if you had the decryption keys, you're not going to get your data back. So there was doubt that this could even be recovered this way. But more importantly, Maersk knew they needed to rebuild their network anyway. Even with decryption keys, they still needed to go through every computer, unlock it, reconfigure it, secure it, check it for any tampering or misconfigurations, and get it back to working again. So they opted just to ignore the ransom and start from scratch. But still, this meant a lot of work to do. Where do you even start to recover a network this big? Well, stay with us, because after the break, we'll hear how they got their cargo moving again. Support for this episode comes from Proton VPN. Okay, look, our ISPs are snooping on us. They're watching what we're doing. And if they aren't, then the next upstream internet provider is. And I'm a privacy nut, so to me, this isn't cool. I want my internet connection to be private and personal. That's why I use a VPN. And the one I highly recommend is Proton VPN, which is made by the same team behind Proton Mail. And get this, they're a company based in Switzerland. And why is that important? It's out of reach of the US authorities, so they can't come in and raid the place to get logs. But get this, even if they did raid it, Proton VPN doesn't store any logs, so there'd be nothing to give to the police. Nice. And to top it all off, their servers are fast and easy to use. If you're a privacy nut like me, get yourself Proton VPN so you can surf the internet with a little bit more peace of mind. To get started, go to protonvpn.com/